I'm rolling in slowly. Here I am.
Here he comes. Here he comes. This is Dan Cottrell, everybody. Dan, would you like to give a quick intro, please?
Yeah, well, my present role is I'm editor of Rugby Coach Weekly. I've been doing that since 2003 in slightly different various formats, but now we're mainly on our website, rugbycoachweekly.net. I come from Bristol, so not far from where you were in your early years, and played my rugby in the West Country, and then went into teaching, and that's from teaching where I was head of rugby at a place called Cranley School. I went on to do Rugby Coach Weekly. I do some coaching, recently got more involved with Bristol Bears DPP and helping out mentoring some rugby clubs in the local area. So that's me at the moment.
Excellent, excellent, Dan. Now, we were in contact some time ago about hopefully doing a full-scale episode for the Amateur Rugby podcast. Obviously, COVID put a halt to that for the time being, but I noticed a tweet that you put out the other day, which I'll briefly quote, and then we'll dig into things from there. And your tweet said, "After watching a grassroots game, the typical comment you'll hear would be, 'Well played, lads, plenty of endeavour,' things like that. But after watching an international, particularly recently, it was more like people saying it was a boring game, not enough of this, too much of that, the referee was this, the coach was that," and just whether we need to sort of readjust and rethink a mindset around this. So just to kick off, where did that tweet come from? What were you thinking, and where do you think it originated?
Well, I think there was some quite tough games over that weekend, and England had a bit more than eked out a victory, but won a game where probably their ambition was a little bit more than the previous week, but not maybe as great. But there's been a lot of criticism of the ambition of teams at international level to play rugby, and that may be aligned with some of the games in the Premiership. Lots of talk about Caterpillar Rucks. And then we look down at maybe the games in the Southern Hemisphere, and we wonder, why aren't we playing a more interesting brand of rugby? And I just feel that we're maybe not looking at the game quite the right way because of the different pressures that are on players, on referees, and the complexity of the game. And we don't watch a grassroots game in the same way. We accept it for what it is, and then we take a view on it from that point of view. And I just feel that perhaps we're being pretty tough on those people who are playing the game, and I know they're getting well rewarded for what they're doing, but is that appropriate? And I'm just getting a bit worried that we are looking for something which maybe is not going to be there, or will only be there on occasion. And it's frustrating in times when we should just be pleased that we're playing rugby and watching it.
Yeah, I mean, I completely hear what you're saying, and obviously I've heard all the kind of negative chatter that's been going on places like Twitter and various boards and things like that, and it's hard to avoid, really. And I'm a very positive person, especially when it comes to rugby. Like, I understand why teams are kicking so much, but I found myself falling into the same trap of thinking this is boring and we need to be seeing more. So my question is, if somebody like me is starting to feel this way as well, has it gone too far, or is it now getting to the bottom of the barrel where it'll start coming up the other side and we'll start seeing some more attacking rugby again?
Well, I think that there are trends in the game, and the game sort of ebbs and flows between attacking and defensive rugby. I mean, part of the problem I probably would say is weather. It's pretty hard to play in wet conditions. If you saw the last two big games of the season for Exeter, one week they were playing in absolutely appalling conditions. I think it was the Wasps game, and really the game just couldn't have a chance to flow. It was quite exciting in some ways, but it inevitably there had to be a lot of kicking. Are you watching it for the right reasons, is what I would ask. Are you watching it because I want England to win, if you're English, or I want Wales to win? Does it matter? Now, I can remember when Wales beat England in 2015, and the first I think it was 2015. Can't quite remember. I'm sure someone will jump in and tell me. And in the end, they took them apart, and most of the Welsh team then got selected for the Lions. Yet the game was quite dire in many ways up until maybe the last 10, 15 minutes when Wales really cut loose. It was all about Wales trying to get scrum penalties, which they got, and then they kicked the goals. Now, from a neutral observer, yeah, maybe that's not a good game. But if you're having lived in Wales for a very long time, I know that not a Welsh person I knew thought that was a terrible game, because they created a game plan and they'd executed it. And maybe we should be looking at those things and appreciating some of the little skills within that which make those things happen. A great tackle, or a great steal, or a pressure situation. Now, yeah, I think that there probably is, on balance, more kicking than we'd like to see if we want to see a flowing game. But is it due to the weather? Are we being too precious about that? I think the other problem is that, going back to the Wales as an example, at the moment their coach Wayne Pivac is under enormous pressure because he's not won many games, and the games he's won have been not maybe against the sides which are the ones that they want to beat. So does he say to the players, play with abandon, let's throw the ball around, let's play? I mean, we've got to be careful, play a bit more rugby in the sense of maybe take a few more risks, or I might get sacked. And he's under pressure, and the players as well. I mean, a player who plays an international game, I don't know what the Welsh players get, but I think they're getting something like £15,000-20,000 a game. I might be wrong with that, but you do take a risk and then get dropped, and then that's a great big chunk of income gone. Yeah, it is difficult, and I feel sorry for those players at the top, because they're under enormous pressure to perform. And do they perform, or are they allowed to perform with a little less pressure? Maybe it would be different.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of pressure involved, especially at those top level games. Now, the coaches get quoted every week basically saying they're in a results-based business. And sure, obviously that's true, and I agree with that. I don't think this is a serious point, but I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit here. How long can they carry on playing a results-based business if the entertainment level, so the entertainment side of the business, keeps plummeting? Because eventually, if enough people stop watching, they're not going to have any results to play for. And I'm not sure whether that's a serious point or whether.
I think it is a very serious point, and it's it may be that World Rugby are looking and thinking, do we want entertainment by playing in a certain way, and do we want to create teams want to play in a certain way? Well, I think that all coaches think, how am I going to win the game? And they've got to play with what's in front of them to win the game, which in the end brings home the bacon. Now, that's very difficult, and I think we forget the enormous amount of pressure, and we don't embrace the pressure of the game. And maybe if we did embrace the pressure, the sort of the little things that are happening, and perhaps it's down to the broadcasters. Maybe the broadcasters are hoping for a good game. I've heard too many saying, well, that was a pretty dire first half. And maybe they're saying, that was a really tough half for both sides because of this, this, and this. So let's look at why they've managed to get this part out of it, this part of it. Let's be a little bit more positive on the fact that, yeah, they've had the kick because the defense has been so good. So, look at this brilliant tackle here. Look at this brilliant play here. Look at how much they've worked really hard to do this. And then look what they've had to do to change that up. And perhaps it's the way that we're looking at the game and we're not maybe appreciating the best bits. Perhaps we want to see what might be the icing more and not enough of the cake. And that's maybe something that rugby specialists need to start to say, right, this is what you should be looking for. This is a really good play. This is very exciting. Why not focus on that? I mean, I think in the end, rugby will naturally find its equilibrium every season, because the referees change, the players change, and if the game is played in June, I think you'll see a much more exciting, fast-flowing game. But if you play it in wet and cold conditions, I know these are professional players, but you're taking a ball there, and it's actually you have to take it here and bring it into yourself. Or if you're taking it here and flicking across straight away, or you can take it out of the back of the hand like that, move the ball more quickly, then it's a different game. We know, and you've done plenty of coaching yourself. You know that the speed of the ball beats defenders. Now, if you can't move the ball quickly, then the defense is always going to have that extra second to come off the line. If the scrum half can get that ball away quickly, then a big difference. And anyone who's been coached at lower levels, grassroots levels, will know that scrum half pass and the ability for the scrum half to get the ball away creates a completely different game. Certainly, when I was coaching women's rugby early on, I mean, the skills of these girls now is incredible. But it was one of the real challenges was to develop the way that the ball moved away, because otherwise the defences were always in control. So perhaps it's that. I'm sure that there'll probably be analysts looking and say, well, Dan, actually, of course, you're wrong. It's not the speed of the ball, it's how hard you hit the rucks. But I feel that the pace of the ball moving around, handling, makes a big difference, because then as soon as that ball moves, your eye line moves, the defence has to move and come in at different angles, and then you create a bit of a different game, and a game where the defences are more mixed up, chaotic.
Yeah, I think you're entirely right. I think the speed of the ball is key to that. Now, Sam Underhill, obviously man of the match last week in the England-Wales game, gave a quote early this week, which I think raised a few eyebrows when he said, I think one of the reasons for all of this is that the quality of the games is higher. And I think a few people, well, it's not. But I think microcosms certainly are. So one example that I've spotted that is definitely the case consistently now is that every team has got probably four or five players that can kick the ball 60 meters every single time. And I think that's another reason why we're getting these bouts of kick tennis, is because there's no weak kicks. So I think in that respect, Sam was dead right that various bits of the game are so good now that the amount of space is getting less as a result.
But you have to remember it's attack and defence, so the quality of both attack and defence has gone up. So complexity comes from simple things done very fast and in the right order. And what we're seeing is things done very fast where the defence may be closing down the attack. So a pass which would normally a player would execute well every single time isn't being executed. England's try against Wales in the early part of the game, the couple of passes were poor passes at the final point, but that's because the pressure was on them, yet they were able to execute it. Now, yes, I think the quality is probably as good as it's ever been, given where players are at. I think that's wrong if anyone thinks that's not the case. The quality of the watch, well, again, I think this is what we're talking about. We need to change how we look at the game and pick out different aspects which we may not have picked out before. I mean, we go back and look at the famous 1973 Barbars All Blacks game, and it was a completely different game to watch. We forget that actually only a few years earlier they just changed the kicking rules because there was too much kicking. It's a different game. It's a different set of quality. Those players are no less athletic for their time. They're no less skillful for their time than the players now in terms of what the preparation they've got to have. It's just we've got to look for slightly different things, and maybe we're hoping for something which is not going to happen as many times as we perhaps want it to happen. But I must say that some people who would say, I want more scrums, I want more lineouts. This is the best bit of the game for me. I love that. And some people say, well, let's get rid of scrums. Well, that takes out what I think is a fantastic part of the game. I mean, the whole point of the game is that it's a game for different shapes and sizes. We don't want to have everyone who's about 6'3" and can handle pass I mean, wonderful. They could pass beautifully off both hands, long distances, and kick everything. But let's remember that it should be lots of different skills involved.
Yeah, lots of good points there. And something I have to keep reminding myself, or something I'm flipping between when I'm watching these games, is whether I've got my coaching hat on or whether I've got my supporter hat on. And with a coaching hat, I can appreciate everything that's going on. With a supporter, it does get more difficult. Now, talking about supporters, how much are we missing those supporters in the stadiums? Because I think this time of year in particular, when the games are tighter, when there is less flamboyant play around, those supporters in the atmosphere and the generation of energy that they bring kind of make these games. I think they're a big part of it. So do you think that's one of the big issues that we're having as supporters at the moment, that there's no fans in the ground?
I think you're right. I think we're removed, once or twice removed from the games now, and we're watching them with a cup of tea because we're not around with our mates having a beer, and therefore we're perhaps we've lost a bit of atmosphere there. If you weren't at the game, you might be at the pub, and if you weren't in the pub, you might be around with your mates having a few beers. And I'm not saying that alcohol makes the game a bit better, but I'm suggesting the camaraderie around it and the banter you're having with each other and all the things you can see and laugh at. Yeah, we're missing out. And we're probably being, we're sitting there as coaches, almost like seriously watching the game and being very, rather than someone saying, that's completely stupid what you said. No, it's not. Look at that, and look at this. And yeah, I agree. It's difficult, and perhaps that's why people are more prone, perhaps, to think, what's happening here? I need just to, and I'm just going to tweet this and or put it on Facebook, and why not watch the game? Have another chocolate biscuit, or have a Kit Kat, as Billy said.
Yeah, indeed. Going back to something you said a minute ago about the TV productions and the commentators. That's an interesting thing, because that's a real mindset thing, I think. They must know nowadays, and especially between certain teams, what kind of game they're going to get. So there's been a number of people kind of picked out for being particularly negative recently. I'm just wondering, how ultra positive have you got to be? Have you got to almost have like a pre-game positivity chat before kicking off and before commentating on some of these games? It seems that way to me at the moment, that they would.
Well, I think we need a bit of a balance. I agree that sometimes perhaps the commentators and the pundits maybe have been a bit negative. It's very easy for us to sit on the sidelines and criticize. I think they have an extremely difficult job because they've got to speak to an audience which goes from someone who knows not much of the game to experts. I think it's important that some people say controversial things and pick out things which make them, I can't believe Brian Moore's just said that, or I can't believe that Will Greenwood's just said that, or Nolly Waterman has just commented on that. That's fine. We'd want people to say things which not everyone's going to agree with. But I think overall, they perhaps need to think, well, just a moment, if no one's watching these games, no one's going to listen to me as a commentator. So maybe I just need to look at some of the other details in it and just perhaps pick out some other things. And I think that plenty of the summarizers do that very well. But I think at the moment they've got a bigger job to do because there's no crowd noise, or there's that rather strange crowd noise in the background, and they've got to create that little extra atmosphere. And that's pretty hard.
Yeah, I do have the utmost sympathy for them. And going on with that, yes, I think there is always something positive that they can drag out of every situation, pretty much, But at the same time, there's a danger that it might seem disingenuous if they're not actually saying how they feel about it as well. I think there's a delicate balance to be had there.
Yeah, definitely, I agree, and that's why they should. There should be a balance with, look, that could be done better, or that wasn't the best decision that they've made, or they could have. I'm disappointed that they didn't do that. Yeah, they've got to save some feeling, because otherwise, if there's no sort of up and down, there's no light and shade in what they're saying, then the richness of what we're listening to is completely lost. And I mean, these commentators, most of the summarizers have been doing it for many years, so they're in a different territory now. However, they've got to understand that the game for, say, when Pivot this weekend, he's got everything to lose in terms of how Wales play. Now, Eddie Jones, in a strange way, is in quite a good position because they're playing against a weakened French team. They're on a high, and it doesn't go quite right. He's got some credit in the bank. But if he'd lost a couple of games in a row, which he's done before, it's a different kettle of fish. I mean, when England lost to South Africa in the World Cup final, it was incredible the amount of criticism the England team got and Eddie got for that. And yet the week before, everybody was the hero, and they could have walked any street and be showered with money and praise for what they did. So, the life of a coach, the life of a player, I mean, it's pretty grim, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a sign of the times, I think, Dan, isn't it? You're either a hero or you're awful at the moment in terms of it's just the social media world we live in, I think, unfortunately. I'd never really believe how good England were. I mean, obviously, the semi-final performance was incredible, but, that's just one performance. And the fact that they were so heavily favourites in a World Cup final, I thought was absurd, really.
But who was making them favourites? And that's the interesting thing to me. I mean, anyone who'd been watching the South African team would have known that it's very rare that South Africa is going to come into a game and not to work really hard. I mean, it's like England were very heavily favoured to beat Wales over the weekend. Well, just a second. Does anyone know anything about the Welsh psyche? This is England. They will pick up their game, and this is a team which had won games before. I know they're missing some key players, but there was every chance that they could have turned England over. And the game is a lot about momentum. I mean, this is why teams kick, because they know that momentum can be a real killer. Suddenly a team gets going, it's making good plays, and the other team can't seem to pull it all together. The passes are going by. It's like watching that England first 20-25 minutes against South Africa. Nothing seemed to work, and it was all about the momentum. I mean, if only we knew the switch, coaches knew the switch. How can I just turn this team from, oh no, I'm just a bit stiff, into, oh yes, I'm flowing and I can move everything and everything flows. It's like anyone who plays golf will know that they hit two bad drives, and the next thing they'll know, I can't get this wrong, and everything stiffens up. And the best golf players, of course, just go. I think Lee Byrne used to say that one of the things he did was he threw some salt over his shoulder if something had gone wrong, and that was a way of just getting rid of the last thing which hadn't quite worked. And I'm pretty sure that's a good scheme to have something that you can just, actually, I can do this. I'm quite talented. I can pass properly, and if there's a 6'7", 20-stone South African just about to cut me in half, it's fine, because I can just still move the ball away. Well, it doesn't happen like that. We know that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I think everybody that's played almost any sport knows that feeling when you're in the zone and everything just feels easy. Everything almost feels like it's moving in slow motion, and you can do whatever you want. But it can go like that. It can go so quickly, and it's so hard to bring it back, especially in team sports. I think your example there of Lee Byrne being one individual, being able to have that mental trick to switch back in, I think is getting more and more common now. I think a lot of players have that kind of thing, but to do it as a whole team, I think is incredibly difficult still. Yeah,
it's like when you get together under the posts. I've often recently I asked coaches what interventions do you have, and how do you help the team sort of pick themselves up after a score? And lots of different coaches came with lots of different. I let the players work it out. Do you have a pre-planned chat? And we've all been in those huddles when someone perks up and says, "Well, you got to do better," and all this sort of thing. And I was involved in a game very recently where we were standing back as coaches, and letting the players take control. And the physio went in and gave them a right old telling off. And we went, well, just a moment, we've just been working really hard on this, and they needed to do it. They must. And so it is difficult. And we get very fired up, and we're probably shouting at the television saying, come on, guys, what the hell's happening? Why aren't you doing this? Why, that's just simple. Well, we've both played rugby, and everyone's listening has probably played sport, and they'll know moments where they just cannot seem to pass the ball in the right place, kick the ball in the right place. It just doesn't seem to be happening. And yeah, you've got to remember that they're all human.
Yeah, very true, very true. Now then, let's try and go full circle with this if we can.
All right, okay.
Subject of last week's show was, are we losing touch with the grassroots of the game? Now, from what we've just discussed in terms of the way the game's been played at the top level at the moment, are the grassroots happy, I think, is my question, not to be playing that style of rugby?
I think we sometimes think that lots of people who play grassroots rugby actually watch rugby. And any coach, certainly of school sides, I often ask this question on courses to say, well, how many players do you think watch games? And the first 15 coach might even say, well, maybe 5 or 6 would have watched a game over the weekend. They just don't watch rugby. They play PlayStation stuff, and they do other things. So yes, to a certain extent, I think we sometimes watch a game and think, well, is it in touch with it? I think really, and maybe this is a hope more than actual the way it is. I think the grassroots game comes from the people who are actually coaching it and playing it, and it comes from within. It's intrinsic. I'm just happy to be there on a Sunday morning with my friends, and some rugby will take place, and some sausage rolls will be eaten, and someone will leave some cones out, and we'll have lost a really good ball, and that's what it is. Now, the fact that we might have watched England play in a rather dreadful game the day before and eke out a victory isn't quite the same as I've got to herd these cats and just have a good time. So yeah, potentially, but I don't think that the senior game or the international game, in a sense, provides cash to help support the game. It shouldn't need to look down at grassroots and say, we're going to inspire you. It should create role models. And this is very important. And I mean, in the press this week, the Argentinian captain has gone through the mill a bit. And I mean, this is not the appropriate forum to talk about it, because I think it was extremely difficult and nuanced situation. And whether the Argentinian rugby union has dealt with it in the right way is difficult to tell. But I think that the most important thing is that they can provide the role models, because when a player turns up at a rugby club, the amount of excitement is incredible. And that's very important. And probably the people won't even know who they are, but when they know that they're an England player, then they'll find out who they are. I mean, this was brought home to me when talking to a rugby agent about some people he had on his books. And he was talking about the difference between the England players and the Welsh players. And he says, not to mention any names, he talked about one England player who would get 10 grand for turning up, and the Welsh guy would get 1 grand because of the exposure. And so what that says that, I mean, that we don't really know who the stars are. There's 1 or 2. I mean, people will say who the famous players. They might mention Dan Carter as a sort of a poster boy, or John Aluma, but they know the footballers a lot better. So it's difficult. They've got to act in the appropriate way. But really, the grassroots has got to look after itself, and it does. I mean, the people I speak to, the best people there, and there are lots of them. They drive the club from underneath. They are the plumbers in the club. They do all the dirty work, and they make sure that people are out there enjoying a game of rugby. And that's nothing to do with the top level. That's to do with on the phone on a Friday night, finding 5 people to fit in with the B team to get them out, to make sure that there's enough sausage rolls on Sunday morning, and that the lights key hasn't been lost. And that's the difference. And you can't watch an international match and make that happen. You've got to have somebody who loves it. And that's the most exciting thing, I think, sometimes for me, is to speak to these people, because they are the unsung heroes. And perhaps they don't like the limelight. They probably need to be told that they're doing a good job. But they love it. They love it because we've got 5 teams out this year when we had 4 last year. And you'll know from coaching in London the difficulties in actually getting a team out. It requires some hell of a lot of phoning around or emailing around and persuading and cajoling and all that sort of thing. So I'm not quite sure if that answers the question, actually. But I've enjoyed talking about something else.
Yeah, well, it's I think it's an interesting question about the grassroots top level of the game conundrum, because I think in some ways they should be very separate, but I think you're right in some of the ways you've just outlined there. Then that connection should absolutely remain, and I think it does. I think it's in a pretty good place, to be honest. I also really enjoyed you chatting about the unsung heroes of the rugby clubs there around the world, because every rugby club's got at least one of them. At least one that puts all the flags out and washes the kit and washes down the changing rooms. And I always try and highlight those people on the podcast whenever I can. So I think we'll bring things to an end there, Dan. So just if you got any final thoughts, and then after that, what would you, as a rugby person, like for Christmas?
Well, first of all, Tim, thanks very much for the opportunity to ramble on about a few things which I'm very excited about. I'm excited about rugby. I'm really excited about what's going on at the moment in terms of coming back. I think there are problems to solve, but there's lots of energy to solve them, and that's the great thing. There are people underneath saying, "Here are the difficulties. Don't give me a problem. I'm going to find a solution, and I'm going to help people get out there." If you're trying to look at ways not to play, then you're not really in sport. You want to be positive about that. So it's good, and I'm excited about it, and I hope that's come across, and I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it. Now, what do I want for Christmas? Well, in truth, rugby wise, what would be really lovely to do is actually to run around and play a bit of touch rugby myself. At the ancient age of 53, I did play a little bit of touch rugby a couple of weeks ago, and I absolutely loved it. I was putting passes into places where no one else was. And that was great, because eventually I realized I needed to change up how I was playing. So it would be great if I could just run around, and that would be the great Christmas present. Now, it reminds me of that story of the British consul who was asked what he wants for Christmas, and he was shocked to read 3 days later in the New York Times that the French guy had asked for world peace. I think that the US guy had asked for the end to world poverty, and he'd asked for pipe and slippers. So obviously, I mean, in general terms, what I would love is to see a chance to get more people back into rugby across the world, and just out there playing, training, and making the connections, which I think we talked about earlier on in terms of maybe the international games are missing those connections. It doesn't have to do anything to do with alcohol. Maybe a few sausage rolls and a cup of tea, then that would be ideal.
Yeah, for sure. Dan, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. And as I think I mentioned earlier, my general positivity had taken a bit of a dip this last week. So thank you for reigniting that in me a little bit. If people want to get hold of you with everything that you do in the game, what is the best way that they can do that?
You can grab me on Twitter. I'm Dan_Cottrell, so that's COTTRELL. There's lots of versions of plenty of my name out there, or just go on to the rugbycoachweekly.net website, and you can contact me through there. And I'll be delighted to hear from anybody. I'm not adverse to taking criticism most of the time. So please, and I'm sure that some of the things I've said, people will say, yeah, I agree with that. But other people say, well, just look at it from this different angle. And I think the most important thing is we've got to listen and just try and take the different views without saying, no, you're wrong. Well, no, I listen, and maybe I'm going to have to disagree, but that's fine. I mean, the great thing about rugby is it's a game for all shapes and sizes, and it's also a game for all different ways. There's more than one way to win a game. Perhaps a little less kicking might be a way.
Yeah, I think it will come round again. It's just a matter of when. We just probably need a little bit of patience and appreciate. We'll appreciate that more then for having gone through this slightly stodgy period of the game.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll end there. So if you're listening to this, thank you so much for turning up. Really appreciate you being here with us. If you've enjoyed it, then tell your mates, chop it on a WhatsApp group or share it wherever you like to share things. Just a quick reminder that this episode was sponsored by Raging Bull, and you can get 10% off of your entire order at ragingbull.co.uk with the code ARP10 at checkout. And we are on all the social channels, on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, literally everywhere. Just type in Amateur Rugby Podcast and you'll find us. If you've got some thoughts about the conversation that Dan and I have just had today, we'd love to interact with you. Twitter's probably the best place for that, I think. And with that in mind, and with the great news from the government this week, in the UK, hopefully, fingers crossed, without too much trouble, before too long, we'll be able to get out and play. Thanks very much.